Welcome to the New Masculine Podcast. This is a place where masculine identifying people come together in community to disrupt outdated models of masculinity and together construct new models for our way forward as men. As a special note, while this conversation is between men, this podcast values all beings and seeks to create positive impacts for all. I'm your host, Travis Stock. I am a master life coach, an equus coach, which means I often partner with horses when supporting clients, and I'm a teacher. In my coaching work, I am passionate about the balance of masculine and feminine energies in each of us, regardless of gender. I seek to help others nurture a relationship with both types of energy, which often leads to a greater sense of wholeness. And yet what I found in my work with men is that many of us have been taught messages about what it means to be a man by first teaching us to avoid anything that is associated with the feminine. That avoidance leads to few experiences of intimacy, emotions outside of anger, vulnerability, or even a sense of belonging. Striving to comply with these models of masculinity has many of us feeling isolated, ashamed, unworthy, afraid, angry, and depressed. That's why I started this podcast, to bring men together who are ready for something new, something more whole. All too often as men, we struggle with our mental health in silence, without support. I know that's something I did for much of my 20s as I struggled to accept and love myself. While I presented as happy, functioning well, and even achieved a 4.0 GPA while getting my master's degree, privately I felt a deep melancholy, was often depressed, and felt very alone. I think my next guest can relate as he has one of those stories where the consequences of that kind of isolation became more and more extreme until a new way of being was necessary. More on that in a bit. Now, he uses all he's learned from his challenges to help others free themselves from the mentalities that keep them stuck and prevent them from living their best lives. Sam Morris is the founder of the Unbreakable Human Collective, which focuses on creating more conscious men and is on a mission to help 1 billion humans save themselves, get out of suffering, and walk through their fires. He describes himself as a leader, as a human, and as a lover. The mantra he carries for himself and brings to his work is be open to change and always allow yourself to be a beginner in everything you do. So let's all settle in to some beginner's mind and learn from this man's journey. Welcome to the New Masculine, Sam.
Great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's really wonderful to have you and to connect. As a fellow coach in the world, it's nice to connect with other men that are holding this torch with me and helping us change what masculinity is for men and help free men.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Great to connect.
I think something that as I said in the intro, that your mantra around this, being a beginner in everything that you do, that's been such a helpful lesson for me in my life, is being able to adopt a beginner's mind when going into things. I think we as men expect ourselves to be experts at things from the get-go, or we don't try things that are new because we're not good at them. And that whole idea of just going into it as a beginner and accepting yourself as a beginner, it's transformative in the way that we show up.
It cannot be understated, the value of this, because, I've learned the hard way that trying to be, I learned the lesson the most painfully in my real estate career. I wanted to be, best broker in the office, making $10 million a year on day one. And it led to years and years and years of just basically beating my head against the ceiling. And, to allow yourself to be a beginner and to say, I don't know, is to open yourself up for connection, open yourself up for learning, and open yourself up, honestly, for speed. Because when you can be a beginner and say, I don't know, please show me, or I don't know, I'm going to figure this out, you actually take massive steps ahead as opposed to just assuming or pretending that you do know. Because somewhere along the line, I think everybody, but really as men, we've come to say, or we've learned that it's not okay not to know. Because then that basically what that does is it dings our sense of masculinity and makes us feel less than scared of, we're going to lose what we have, we're not going to get what we want. And all these stories come in. But really, if you can have the confidence in yourself to sit back and say, I don't know how to do that, I'm going to learn by any means necessary, that's the fast track to success.
Oh, that's so true. And I find that I still struggle with that as a business owner. I never saw myself as a solopreneur, like a solo business person. I don't know what I'm doing when I'm running a business. I'm the content of my business, not the actual business of my business. And I find myself still challenged to ask for help sometimes and to say to people, I don't know, and to get some advice on what to do or to pay somebody to actually support me because my ego gets in the way as a man, that somehow I'm failing as a man for not knowing how to do this.
Yeah, it's so true. As much as I preach it and tell it to my clients and practice as much as I can, there are still times when I get caught in that, jumping ahead or just not bullying, but bullheaded my way through things about I can do this. And in reality, I'm just like you, I'm the content guy. I create the ideas behind everything. The other stuff is not my forte. And really, when I start to try and do all that stuff because I think it's the fastest way, it's not the fastest way. It's just clogging up the works.
And it doesn't make you feel very good about yourself when you're trying to do things that you're not good at and you're struggling through them and you're muscling through them and the self-doubt can creep in. It's not a good recipe at all.
The ripple effect is massive through everything.
Yeah. So I had alluded in the intro to you having a bit of a story that of relating to mental health struggles and dealing with them alone. Share with me what your story is. What led you to becoming the man you are today?
So my story starts in Vermont. In the early 70s, I was born up there, and for a long time in my life, I would look back at my childhood and think that was pretty great, and it was. I mean, because there's some things that happened to me later in life, like mental illness, anxiety, depression, addiction, that normally will be products of abusive households or alcoholic households or that type of thing. And there was none of that in my childhood. It was a very loving household. We traveled quite a bit. I played tennis and golf every summer, skiing in the winters, living in it. And even for years afterwards, I never really associated much trauma with that at all. Now, later in life, as I got to be an adult, I realized that I had really bad social anxiety, which manifested into generalized anxiety disorder. Then depression showed up. And then on the tail end of that, or actually kind of all rolled into one really, was a 15-year battle with drugs and alcohol. And so, looking back now, I can say that, externally the childhood did appear great and it felt great, but internally was a massive struggle because I was born with really, really severe asthma, a long list of food allergies and eczema. So what that did was, first of all, it put me into fight or flight immediately. I had no choice but to view everything, every food, every breath of air as a threat, because it really, there were times in my life, I spent for the first 13, 15 years of my life, probably 3 weeks or 4 weeks a year, I was in the hospital with either an asthma attack or having eaten a peanut by accident. Something threatened my life at 3 or 4 times a year. And so to have that learned behavior, in that 0 to 7, that core belief area where we learn our core beliefs, to have that program installed is basically, if I'm not in the hospital, I'm living in anticipation of a threat all the time. So what this did is it made me very withdrawn as a kid. And it also made me feel very different than all my peers, because I saw all my peers running around, playing basketball, playing soccer, playing football, playing baseball, whatever, running around with Vermont's a lot of farms. So riding horses and, tractors and hay and playing in the barns and all stuff. And all this stuff, I did it. I was there for all of it, but I always felt less than because, if it was a basketball game, for example, there was a high probability that at some point I was going to have an asthma attack and have to take a timeout. And then, kids would make fun of me, or I would feel like I was letting the team down. So I had this fear of basically the world and other people. And then I also had this, I made up this story that I was a burden. I was a burden to my friends. I was a burden to my family. So I have this is where the depression comes from, is just that feeling of always climbing up a hill. I remember I've never really done much dream work, but I always had this dream when I was a kid of playing soccer, and I was the goalie, and the ball would always get kicked over the goal and down a hill behind the goal. And I would go down and get the ball and I'd throw the ball back over the hill. But as I was climbing back up the hill would just turn to mud, and I would slip and slide and scratch and claw and try and get up the hill. And I could never get up the hill. And that, like I said, I've never done the work on it, but that's how life felt, was I was always just trying to climb up slippery hills, and it was a struggle, and there was this weight. And so, I withdrew from social situations, which, for a long time, I would just tell my mom, I don't feel well. I don't feel like going to the party. And so again, like that social anxiety was something that stuck with me for a long time. And now when I was about 6 or 7, I started playing tennis. And this was kind of like the first lesson in allow yourself to be a beginner, because I didn't know it at the time, but like I didn't have expectations of being on the pro tour when I picked up a racket at 6 years old. So what I did is I learned
what?
I shortly thereafter, but but like at first, I was like, I didn't even like tennis. I just saw my sister playing and I was like, that looks like fun. I want to be part of that. So I tried it, and it turns out that I was really good at it. I had really good eye-hand coordination. So it was something. Tennis became my first love because it saved my life in a sense that it allowed me to kind of express my gifts and express myself and kind of express my identity and become who I was. And so I really dedicated my entire life from age 6 till about 22 to tennis. My thing was I shortly thereafter, this is kind of a half a joke, because shortly thereafter I did decide that I wanted to, I was going to be a professional tennis player. Like I wanted to go play the junior tournaments and then go play in the ATP tour and all this stuff. And so, that became the priority of my life beyond the socializing and going to parties and stuff like that. Like, I still went to parties in high school and stuff like that, but if there was a tennis tournament, like that was the number one priority. Like every day I was going to play tennis for 3 to 4 hours a day. And that, I didn't have to have an excuse. I didn't have to say I don't feel well. I just said, I'm playing tennis and I'm choosing to play tennis, and it was perfect for me. Tennis played another role for me later in life. I'll get into that in a second. So, through high school now, and into college is where, like, this is when I started to kind of realize, like, going to social situations, going to parties, like, as a kid, I just knew I didn't like it. I didn't know why. Like, I didn't have the language. I didn't have the frame of reference. I didn't really have any kind of handle on what that feeling was, except that I don't like that. That's uncomfortable for me. Now, getting into high school and into college a little bit, into high school was when I realized, like, I just feel, I recognize that I can say now it was anxiety, but I just felt really uncomfortable. I started to get kind of like, I started to have that frame of like, what this is a really uncomfortable feeling in social situations. And, I wasn't drinking yet. I didn't really smoke pot all through high school because, again, I looked at that as those things will only get in the way of tennis. The couple times I did drink, they did get in the way of tennis. And so I kind of made a mental note to myself, like if tennis is this big a priority to me, nothing can come in the way of that. And because really, like what it was my identity and it was saving my life. And so I really I was very attached to it and I didn't want to lose it. So, getting into college, I went to college. I got recruited to play tennis in college. I played for my college, number 1 for the team. And I realized too, as I get to college, I realized that this uncomfortable feeling in social situations goes away when I drink. And so I started drinking, Friday, Saturday nights, maybe, if I didn't have a tennis tournament that weekend. So what I would do is I would recognize that, like, holy crap, like this relief comes over me when I drink. And again, 17, 18, 19 years old, I didn't really put any dots together on this. I didn't connect any of the dots that, like, drinking to make yourself feel better. I mean, it's a social lubricant. There's no question about it. But like beyond that, I was using it as more of a, cover, like a safety blanket. It wasn't just that it was making me happy and all that stuff. That was true. But really, as I found out later in life, like I was using it to put my social anxiety to bed for that, 5 or 6 hours or whatever we were at the party.
Yeah, you were medicating yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, so after college, my tennis career ended. I kind of realized that the pro tennis tour dream was not one that was really for me. It involved a lot more commitment than I was willing to put forth. And I kind of, through college and through, starting to go to parties and stuff like that, I had learned to really love socializing, and I loved the life and my friends and the girls and like all the stuff that was there. And so I kind of had to make a decision. Do I want to go to make this massive effort to like basically give up everything, a lot of stuff that I love to play tennis? Or do I just follow in this path of like a quote unquote normal existence of get a job and go live my life? And I chose to just get a job and go live my life. And so now tennis wasn't there anymore, but, the kind of the last 3 or 4 years of my tennis career, tennis was serving as a kind of last line of defense for me against alcoholism and addiction. So 22, 23, I graduated college, tennis stopped. And that's kind of the line of demarcation where my drinking and partying really picked up. And for a long time, it was, you know, it was drinking without consequences. It was, I mean, we were not sober, and it wasn't very controlled. It was really wild. Like, we had a lot of really good times, but there was no DUIs. There was no, broken relationships. Like, everyone around us was all doing the same stuff. I was definitely doing it a little more than the rest, but it wasn't really like an extreme at this point. That went on for about 7 years until I turned 30. I had moved down to Florida with my ex-wife. We were married, we got married in North Carolina, moved to Florida, and, ended up getting divorced down in Florida. And that's so now I'm 30, and I moved down to Miami with a buddy of mine. And this is when, like, all the restrictions in my life were off. No more tennis, no more school, no more wife, girlfriend. So, like, I was doing commercial real estate, so I was making a bunch of money, a lot of free time. And at 30, there was a steep decline off of a cliff as far as like the quality of life isn't really the right term, but just like the structure of life fell apart. It started to be missing work on a Friday, maybe missing work on a Monday, maybe showing up Friday morning still hungover from the night before. Like, there was signs that this was all falling apart. And so from age 30 to 33 was that decline. And then at 33, I got my first DUI. Actually, that's not true. It was my first DUI, with a stay in jail. I had gotten a previous DUI in college, or right after college. But it was kind of like a, slap on the wrist kind of situation. Yeah. So this one was like the first real, like, oh gosh, this is bad kind of consequence. And so, that precipitated my first stay in rehab. So 33, the spring of 2007, I went to rehab for 28 days, and, no intentions of being sober. I didn't identify as an alcoholic. I didn't really think there was a problem. I just thought that, so one of the things is that I had controlled the drinking for so long because of the tennis. And then I controlled it kind of after college a little bit. For the most part, it was a weekend warrior type situation where, I'd go crazy on the weekends, but then wrap it up on Sunday and be at work on Monday. Everything was fine. So I had that data point in my head. But really, when you go down the road of an alcoholic or an addict, they always say, like, once a cucumber becomes a pickle, you can never go back to being a cucumber.
That's an interesting metaphor, especially for alcohol.
Yeah, right. You're pickled. Yeah. That's where the term pickled comes from.
Yeah.
So once you cross that threshold of, an alcoholic, I mean, I don't think there's any recorded cases of it coming back across the line. So, but I thought that I could. So I went away to rehab. I was like, you know what, guys, you're right. Like, my girlfriend was like, you need to go away. My parents were like, you need to go away. And I was like, you know what? You're right. I do. I need a timeout. But I'm going to come back and do the same thing I'm doing right now. I just need to get away for a minute. And so I came back out of rehab, and, things were good for maybe like 2 months, and then quickly fell back into like the really destructive, 3, 4, 5, 6 day benders, missing work, girlfriend calling me, where are you? Parents calling me, where are you? Like, basically, like, it's classic alcoholic addict stuff. And then, so that went on from age 33 to 38 was basically the same cycle over and over and over of, like, a little bit of sobriety, maybe go to rehab, come out, a little bit of sobriety, fall off the wagon, drink for 6 months or a year. And just that basic cycle of, like, some really bad consequences. I fell off a balcony 35 feet one time. I got cancer in my mouth twice. So these are all things that were wrapped up in this 5-year stretch of just complete disaster, dumpster fire. And so, at age 37, I actually had kind of what I would call a spiritual awakening, where I was in a Native American sweat lodge after a week-long bender. And I just kind of had this moment of clarity where I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I can't do it to myself. I can't do it to the people around me. I can't, like, this is just, like, all the basic 14 years before at this point had basically shown up on my doorstep and said, yeah, it's time. And so I said, okay. And so I went out of that sweat lodge, and I stayed sober for a year. And then I moved to North Carolina. And, again, like, I still had this in the back of my head. I hadn't dealt with any of the mental health stuff. I still hadn't dealt with depression or the social anxiety around anything. So I still had this, like, I'm back in North Carolina where I went to college, and, like, I want to go out and be social, but at the same time, it's so uncomfortable for me, and I want to go on dates and meet girls, but it's so uncomfortable for me to do this sober. So, that amount of willpower of being sober can only last for so long when there's something underlying like that, basically cutting you off at the knees a little more every day. So I ended up having a drink on September 20th, 2012. And for the next 2 months, it was a complete sprint to the finish line of my drinking, but it was a disaster. I spent a week in jail this time. I got a DUI and I had my dog in the car at the time. The dog got taken to the pound. I lost my house. I lost my job. My girlfriend moved to California. We broke up and she moved to California. I mean, it was, how that saying of what happens when you play a country song backwards? You get your girl back, your dog back, your house back. Except I didn't get any of this back. So I lost everything. And then I was sitting at my house. It was November 21st, 2012, and I was sitting there at 4 a.m. just looking at some drugs and alcohol on the table, and I had another moment like I had in the sweat lodge where it was like, this has to end now. And so from that moment on, I didn't know how or what, or I didn't know anything except that I can't go on like this. And so from that moment on, I became willing to be a beginner. That was my first idea was I need to learn how to socialize sober. I need to learn how to go on dates sober. I need to learn how to live sober because I know that this combination is not working. It's hurting my family. It's hurting me. It's hurting friends. I mean, friends wouldn't invite me to their weddings. They stopped calling. It's a real disaster. And so, I just became willing. So the first thing I looked at was the social anxiety. I said, you know what? At this point I had learned to love the ideas of going to a bar and watching football or going to a football game or going to a concert or going all these social things that come with alcohol for me. I actually did like the social things, but I had to learn how to do these without alcohol. And so to be a beginner was basically to bite the bullet and just say how, what do I do? So I love the term fuck-its, the fuck-its. The fuck-its when you're drinking, when I was drinking, the fuck-its meant fuck it, I'm getting drunk and hammered right now. If I had one, fuck it, I'm having 15. And so it was very, very destructive. And so when I was able to shift, when I got sober, I was able to shift the fuck-its into going into a social situation and just knowing that I'm going to feel uncomfortable and not drinking, but fuck it, I'm going to do this anyways. Fuck it, I'm zero fucks given to this point. So it went from a very destructive pattern to a very constructive pattern. I used it for courage as opposed to for fear. And so that was a big turning point for me when I was able to just shed the stories, shed all the judgments I had about myself and move into just doing the things I love and learning how to do them from a very from one step, 2 steps, 3 steps, however many steps it took, just getting to the point where I was okay doing these things. And, and to be honest, this is where I learned about being a beginner again, was that it happened really fast. Within the first year, I had an amazing life in San Francisco, nothing to do with alcohol. I was going out to the bars with my friends and we were going to Halloween parties and dressing up and basically doing all the things I did drunk, but I was doing them sober and loving it. And it was all because I said, fuck it, I'm going to be a beginner. I'm just going to learn how to do this. And so that for me, that's been the biggest thing. And with mental health, we have to understand, and I tell my clients this, you have to understand that you're going to have, it's not linear for one. You're going to have moments where you're going to fall back, but the idea is, what you want to do is if say you have a depression, the way life is showing up right now as 98% depression, 2% maybe a good day here and there. And what you want to do is you just want to grow that 2%. So then, after a while it's 50-50. Maybe you have a week of 2 weeks of really good days and maybe a week or 3 or 4 days of bad days. So over time, you can't look at it day by day, but over time you can look at instead of 98% and 2%, now it's 2% depression, 98% good. And that's what you're going for. Because with mental health, one last thing, with mental health, we catastrophize. If we have one bad day, we think we're back in depression.
Totally.
And that's, because it's so painful and so raw for us. It's oh God, here we go again. But in reality, everyone has bad days. Our trigger for it is different.
Yeah, that's so true of my experience. Having spent so much of my 20s either fully in depression or on that borderline, diving into depression, that when I have blue days or even blue days in a row, I do have self-judgment. I do brace against it. I do panic in that because I spent so much time in there. And learning how to sit with that discomfort has been such an important part of my own journey of learning how to be with myself and to let myself be human and not always be happy or joyful or not angry and grieving or whatever. I mean, this world is sometimes hard. 2020 has been a hard year. Even as
No
coaches, we don't have a roadmap for how to navigate a global pandemic, racial unrest, and a crazy political environment. We don't have that. We have some skills and some tools to talk about things, but we often get lost in it too. And so I'm so there with you that it's not linear, and being able to recognize your own reaction to a normal human experience, which is sometimes sadness or grief or anger or anxiety, noticing that and not bracing against it, surrendering into it.
Yeah, for sure. Because the surrender into it, like just surrender to this experience. When you say that, like, it's really crazy, but it's almost immediately dissipates. The whole thing dissipates. You're like, oh, not that bad.
Yeah, it's usually our mental stories and our pushing against that create the real problems. I'm really curious about your story because I think it's got enough drama to it that we can like see it. It's got enough like ups and downs and roller coasters and jail time and breakups, and it's got enough of the action story to grab our attention. But I think it symbolizes what a lot of men feel. I'm struck by at the core of what was driving so much of your struggle in the world was anxiety and depression, was unchecked mental health conditions. And those were created not because you had terrible parents or because you were abused as a child or anything. It came from the fact that some of it came from the fact that you had a body that was rejecting a lot of its food and a lot of the things around it. So you are dealing with this, what life teaches you to have this level of anxiety and a level of on-guardness with the world. And that drives a lot of dysfunctional behavior because you're not quite able to move through it. And I think so many men have that experience where we have something really challenging happen to us. It puts us on guard, and yet we're not allowed to admit that we're scared. We're not allowed to admit that we're afraid, that we're upset, that we're sad, that we're missing people, that we're lonely. We're not allowed to admit those things in our culture. And so we deal with them alone, and then they metastasize. And then they turn they turn you into a pickle, as you were saying before.
That's so true. Yes. Like that fear, the fear is a big one because, we can't be scared. Like, we're not allowed to be scared. Like, if we show fear or if we're scared of something, the way that gets translated in with men and the masculinity is like, we are weaker, we are less than, our wife is going to leave us, our partner is going to leave us, our boss is going to fire us, our friends are going to hate us. The story we tell ourselves is that if any of that happens, the fear, the judgment, the weakness that you were talking about, the crying, our default is like, we are now less than. And it's just not true.
I mean, you even experienced it as a kid, just having allergies. That is a source of where you fall lower on the hierarchy. Kids making fun of you for having allergies, for having challenges. We're constantly teaching boys to assess themselves on the hierarchy. Who's got the most power? Who's got the least power? How do we keep some people below us so that we feel good about ourselves? I think that's such an interesting challenge that we face as men. And it is really it's really problematic. It really creates a lot of challenges for people in their lives when they feel fear, because fear is a normal human emotion and reaction. And yet we are not giving men, any skills for how to deal with that other than to tough it out.
And even further down that road maybe is like you brought it up. You said, as boys, like, we're told we're wrong. Like, you have allergies and asthma, you're broken, you're wrong. You're gay, you're wrong. You have XYZ, you're wrong. Like, you're not, we get told that we're less than, and then that translates to anytime you feel different going forward, you're wrong, no matter what it is. But it started as a kid when you felt something and you got you basically were told you were wrong for feeling that way. Now it's like, if I say I don't know in a boardroom with a bunch of other people, I'm wrong. And I'm back to that little kid that felt so different and so wounded and so traumatized. And going back there, oh, thank you.
Yeah. No, nobody wants to be in the boardroom going back to that space.
No, but that's where therapy or working with coaches or doing the work, it keeps you from having to do that in the boardroom.
Yeah, totally. I think it's so true that the languaging I would put on that is that we raise boys into men, infusing a ton of shame into them. There is this inherent shame that most of us carry around. Some of us are better at masking it. Some of us are better at puffing ourselves up to sort of show our bravado and act like we're not ashamed. But most men that I work with, most men that I come in contact with, when you really get down into it, there's a lot of shame that most of us have internalized that we're coping with at all times.
Yeah. And also like when you touch on that shame, a lot of people, they feel it. They don't know where it came from. But then when they find out where it came from, it's almost like they have a hard time accepting that that's okay that happened. It goes back to basically what is a misunderstanding. One of my friends is a coach. She helped me a lot with my inner child and my childhood trauma stuff. And she said that basically it's a misunderstanding between you and the ideal. You weren't wrong. You weren't broken. It was just a misunderstanding that now has manifested itself into less than. I'm less than. I'm not a man. I'm weak, whatever it is. And then, of course, then it all becomes fear of loss. I'm going to lose my stature. I'm going to lose my reputation. I'm going to lose my house, my kids, my home, whatever it is.
Yeah, I think there's an element, that sounds true to me, that there's an element of misunderstanding the ideal. And yet, what would you say about a culture that actually tells you what the ideal is and tells you fail at living up to the ideal? Say, like as you brought up, like gay boys are taught you failed as a man. Mm-hmm. Our culture, that's not a misunderstanding. Our culture teaches us that. It says that outright.
Yeah.
So I guess maybe it's the misunderstanding of the people that taught us that.
Yes.
But how do you reconcile that, well, I was taught that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's absolutely a fear projection on whoever's saying that, whether that be like other friends, parents, whoever it is. Like kids pick up on all these things. So wherever that information is coming from is a projection of like, I think this is wrong, so you must be wrong. And so then you say as a kid, well, crap, I'm wrong. I'm broken. Like I'm less than a man. And then now, I mean, as a kid, you internalize that. And now it's just a data point for you. And then it's got that trauma hook in you where you don't even know when that's going to show up. It could be 5 years. It could be when you're 12. It could be when you're 22. It could be when you're 42. But somewhere along the line, something is going to make you feel like that kid again. And you're going to go right back there. Now, as far as the culture, it really just has to be a shift. We have to have a greater consciousness about it. We have to have more awareness. We can't just operate with that ignorance anymore. I don't think there's like one magic bullet that you can say like, do this and it will be different. It's like, as a collective, we have to understand that like, we have to be aware that kids are so receptive to this stuff. And even as adults, like, have compassion. Have compassion for someone. Like, that's one of the greatest lessons I've ever learned is that, like, it's really hard for me to even get mad at people now. Like, when they do something to me or when I hear about them doing something, my immediate response is like, well, what happened to them to make them behave like that? Like, even Donald Trump, as whatever you say about him, like, to me, that's a wounded person, and like, it's his behavior and the symptoms of his wounds are extremely toxic and clearly not very healthy. But like, at the core, like, it's a wounded person. And like a lot of men, it's the toxic masculinity versus wounded masculinity. Like it's hard for me to say like, that's just a bad person. I honestly, I believe that bad people, just inherently core root level bad people, I don't believe they exist. I believe that people get wounded and then they bring that wound forward, whether that's narcissism, whether that's toxic masculinity, whether that's anger, abuse, whatever it is, alcoholism. That is a wound manifested as an adult, a childhood wound manifesting as an adult symptom.
Well, it sounds like you were even saying that that's true in your own life, that you were carrying your wound around with you and you were being harmful to yourself and to the people in your lives, your relationships.
Yeah. So, one of the things that came forth when I got sober was that I didn't love myself. Like, because of all that stuff, all that you're wrong, like kids are getting picked on, like not being successful, not being popular, not being liked, which wasn't true, but is what I experienced of it, the story I made up around it. It caused me to search so much for external things, external validation, external safety, because I didn't have any of that inside me. I didn't feel safe ever. And so, searching for that is basically like, in a relationship that shows up as like breaking a heart, or as like, with parents, it shows up as, yelling and basically like abusive, like being abusive to your parents, yelling at them when you don't get what you want, basically throwing a fit. And it shows up in all these, like, both, personally toxic and externally toxic ways, because it's basically just searching for safety and not knowing how to go about it.
Yeah. And I think we uniquely teach men to externalize their sense of, their okayness in the world. It's the job you get. It's the sport you play. It's not the healthiness of your relationships. It's not how you are as a father. It's not how you are as a human being. It's really about how well you produce, how well you make money, how well you perform at something.
And then we as men, we make up that all that stuff is providing safety for our family.
Yeah.
When in reality, like, it's you standing up as a man in your divine masculine and holding that space. That's where the real safety is. It's not the money or the cars or the house or whatever, the place you live. It's how you show up in your divine masculine that makes people around you feel safe, not all the things you have.
That's so true. Something you just said a little bit ago that I want to touch on is that place of self-love that you didn't have, that you didn't know you didn't have for a long time, that you basically needed the whole time. I think that's something I can really resonate with. I struggled to love myself, and there are times where I still struggle to love myself. It's still something that I have to play with and work with. Because that, as you were saying earlier, like those first 7 years of our lives, we imprint some pretty powerful patterns and ways of relating to the world in those first 7 years. And if you internalize shame, if you internalize, I'm wrong, I'm bad, it's going to take a while to undo that and to really find out all the different ways that has influenced your life and has controlled your behavior. What were the sort of major points for you of how you learned that self-love piece, how you recognized it first, and then what you did to actually get to that place of self-love?
So the first thing was, I had a friend of mine tell me, in a period of very destructive behavior, he's like, Sam, we all love you, but when are you going to learn to love yourself? And I was like, I just know what to say. I was like dumbfounded. I was like, and it was like, that was a literal thought process. Like before I got sober and started looking at this, the idea of self-love never entered my head. It's so strange to me because it wasn't even a concept that I was like even knew existed. It was kind of like learning that 2 + 2 is 5 when you thought all along 2 + 2 was 4. Or the other way around. 2 + 2 is 5, but then you learn that it's 4. I just didn't have any rational idea about what self-love was. And I thought that like having a good time and really it was is that as long as other people loved me, that was fine. That means I'm good. And to say like I love myself, that didn't matter. It wasn't, why would that matter? Like other people love me. That's all that matters. And so, that just ends in disaster all the time because that's not sustainable. Like if you don't have the self-love, the outside love is never ever going to fill you up ever. And I learned that. I mean, even into like after putting down the drinks, like it was years before I like recognized where this shows up in my life and all the ways that it shows up in my life. And really, the lack of self-love was really at the root of everything for me. The root of the depression. Because, depression, what is depression? They say is anger turns inwards. So, basically depression is the opposite of self-love. Anxiety is basically like, it's self-doubt. It's like, I'm not gonna get what I want. Those people aren't gonna like me when I meet them. Like, it's future. It's the future stuff that you're anxious about. Like, I always say, like, what's the difference or the similar, faith and fear are actually exactly the same because they're both rooted in something that hasn't happened yet. And that's where anxiety is. If you can have the fear is the anxiety, the faith is the belief. If you have the belief, you're good. And the belief starts with self-love. If you can learn to believe in yourself enough to love yourself, or if you love yourself enough to believe in yourself, that way you can show up. I can go out to bars now and just hang out and have a glass of water in my hand and be fine. And it's really about, like, if you ask yourself a question, and the question is, what if I really loved myself? What would I do if I really loved myself? How would I act if I really loved myself? What would Sam do if Sam really loved himself? And you put that filter on it and you just sit with it for a minute. The answer becomes pretty clear pretty quickly. And then it's up to you to have the courage and the discipline to do that. And then from there, it's just, you got to keep doing that every day, all the time. And to say it does become natural over time, but there's always going to be little things that are going to make you say, do I really love myself? And a lot of it, like, one of the things I work with my clients a lot on is discipline. Everyone hates discipline. They think, because discipline has been so proven over time to be punitive. Discipline means you can't have fun. Discipline means you can't let loose. Discipline means you can't do this. You can't do that. You can't do this. No, what discipline means is that I love myself enough to do the right thing for myself. That's what discipline is. Discipline is just self-love.
So you've obviously come a long way in your self-awareness, in your self-love. Where and how did you do all of that work? Was it with a therapist, with a coach, in rehab, by yourself? Like, where and how were you doing all of that work?
So, at first it was in AA. The first few years I did a lot of this work in AA with sponsors, and I did have therapists too, just to work through all this stuff. Honestly, most of the work that I got done was with other guys, like best friends, like friends that I met when I moved to San Francisco, that I could just show up as my vulnerable, wounded, crying, angry, whatever self. Like, I could show up and be myself, and they would say, cool. Like, I see you. What do you need from me to get through this? How can I support you? And not to say, like, you're broken, you're wrong. Like, why do you feel that way? You're stupid. Like, ha ha ha, look at you. Like, none of that stuff. That heals those wounds. When you realize that, like, that's when you understand that it was a misunderstanding, and you can throw the kids being kids on it. But at the same time, like, that internalized language was getting shifted into, it's okay. Like, we can get through this. And so for the first 6.5 years of my sobriety, it was AA, and it was talking to these guys. And honestly, like, these guys, I met them in AA, but we hardly ever talk about drinking. Like, we don't talk about, like, cause, I mean, for me, the drinking was, like, once I stopped, it was over, it was done. And I'm very lucky to have had that experience. A lot of people struggle with that, but for me, I was just done. So, like, really, it's like, okay, I'm not drinking anymore, but I still struggle with relationships. I still struggle at work, or I still struggle with I get anxious days, or I get self-doubt. And, like, having these people, these guys that I can call and say, I'm struggling with this. And they don't judge. They don't laugh. They just say, how can I help you? And so, like, that alone, I mean, it's making me almost, like, tear up right now. Like, to have that alone, like, is so healing that it's just, it cannot be understated. And it happened, the healing there happens so fast, because you can breathe and relax and just show up. And, like, when you can learn to show up and that you're okay how you are, that's the most healing thing you can do. Now, over time, like, I don't really work. I have one therapist now that I call every once in a while, like, just to check in, make sure, like, run some ideas by for stuff like that. So I've moved into a lot of, working with plant medicines recently, which has been amazing healing. Like, I mean, I would say, like, the first 6.5, 7 years of the AA experience and the therapy and all that was great. And I would never, not to poo-poo it at all or anything like that, but the healing that's happened in the past year, just from, like, I think a lot to do with quarantine and a lot to do with life, but like, just stepping up, like, learning to find what I don't know and look at that stuff. Cause it's really easy to just get in that loop of like dealing with what you know. Like, I know this is a problem. Let me deal with it. And so you deal with it over and over and over. And it's like, all right, at what point are we diminishing returns here? But, you have to, like, I felt the ceiling. I felt that loop closing off. And I'm like, I felt plateaued. And so I said, I need to look at some other things here to do what I need. How do I break into that realm of, I don't know, like, I know what I know, but I don't know what I don't know. And I need to know what I don't know if I want the next level of healing to happen.
Yeah, totally. Well, it sounds like you had a brush with the divine masculine, a group of men that could really hold each other, that could show up for each other, that could meet each other where you were, that are going to hold you accountable, but also not reinforce the shame that's already there. I wish more men had that experience. I find most men don't have relationships like that, where it's safe to connect at that level, where you can cry, where you can fall apart. You might have one or two that you have found safety within, but a group of men that you can do that work with, that's super powerful. And I get why that emotion comes up for you, because I think it's actually something most of us are craving. When I've done men's only workshops, I find men, the second the first man cries, then everybody wants to cry. Then it's like, there's this like craving for male intimacy that's missing in our culture. And we're relying on the women in our lives to do all of the vulnerable and caring emotions and the intimacy pieces. But this right here, what you're talking about, I think is one of the antidotes to the depression, the anxiety, the mental health crises that are sweeping through male communities all over the place.
I cannot agree with you more. I mean, and like you said, like one or two is, I mean, that's better than having none. But when you can get into that group, there's something about that energy. Getting into a men's group where there's maybe like 10 or 15 guys there. And honestly, like to a lot of guys, that's the scariest thing ever.
That's terrifying for me to think about that.
Terrifying. I mean, for a long time it is like you walk in and like you have to be willing to like let that cape, that facade of judgment go. And then just drop in and get the case of the fuck it. And just like, I'm here, I'm going to show up. And once you do it once, you realize that, holy crap. Like you sit in a men's circle one time and you feel that like all the guys are crying or all the guys are just there holding space for you. You will learn that you will heal and you will learn that this exists and it's possible for you too.
I love that. And I actually really want to highlight also the sort of, as you were saying, the work you've done with plant medicine. There's a lot of research going on right now around the use of psilocybin, MDMA, assisted psychotherapy. There is a lot of work going on right now to explore these substances that have been criminalized, that have been listed as illegal substances, Schedule 1 substances in our culture, that actually have potentially really beneficial side effects. They're looking at psilocybin in the treatment of depression, MDMA in the treatment of PTSD symptoms for war vets and other folks that suffer with that.
Yeah.
There's a lot out there that actually points to new ways of supporting ourselves, because there's so much need that sometimes, as you were saying, it give those substances or that experience of a plant medicine ceremony of some sort, or psilocybin or MDMA assisted psychotherapy, it gives you that ability to see what you don't know. As you were saying, you need to know what you don't know in order to know what to do.
Yeah.
It shifts your internal state just slightly enough so that you can actually see things you never saw before.
100%. Like it brings you to places that you just, first of all, it brings you to places with a level of safety. Because it shuts off that, like psilocybin, for example, it will shut off the fight or flight. So like if you have depression or anxiety or any kind of mental health, you basically live in fight or flight. If you can shut that off and like just clear up the bandwidth for something else to come in, there is so much healing in that you'll see things you don't know, and things will become clear about like, I need to do this to move forward. Like this is the way forward. Like I don't need to do this, but this is the way forward. Or this is, when they say like you're called to it, like you will get called to look at something, and it might be uncomfortable for a second, but that's why there's ceremonial and there's shamans involved and whoever else needs to be there. It's a very safe environment, but you will get shown the things you asked to be shown. And for me, it's been, I mean, I just can't explain how clear things have become for me, and how the anxiety is chatter. and how much since I've started doing that, the chatter in my head has gone from 1,000 miles an hour to like 5 miles an hour. And that, to have that relief, now after the plant medicine ceremony, like then the integration happens. And to have that chatter calm down all the time so you can actually do the integration without defaulting back into fight or flight is where the real magic happens.
Yeah, it's actually in a lot of where the real work is, taking that transformational experience and bringing it out into the real world. Because it's been my experience too, because plant medicine has been a significant and important part of my own healing journey as well. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's for everyone. I don't think the right fit for everyone. But I also find that the horse work that I do a version of coaching that takes people out and does experiential learning with horses and relationship development. And it's a big metaphor for the way you do one thing is the way you do all things. And you get real-time feedback on how you're showing up, your impact on the external environment, your views on intimacy, your views on leadership, your views on boundaries. You get this real-time feedback because you're being with an animal that's so large that it requests a specific amount of presence from you that none of us get to experience in our daily lives. We're so stuck in the past or so worried about the future. And being there with the animal asks you to step into presence on a different level. And then one of the things I've said around when people ask me about like plant medicine stuff, if it's not the right doorway to go through, there are other doorways to get to the same place. I think the horse work that I do goes to the same place, but through a different doorway. They alter you in certain ways that allow you to see the world slightly different. And then we come up with a plan of action for how you hold that.
Right. And then, like you said, like how you now every day, like you have to remember that experience because, you know, it's easy to get to be in that setting where whether it's plants or with animals or even like surfing or rock climbing or other things that skiing is another one. Like you really have to have that level of presence where if I'm not wholly present here, there's danger involved, you know? And so like to have that, it really does shut everything else off. And then you can take that, like you don't have to be with a horse in your daily life to experience that. You can say, oh, this is how I felt when I was with the horse. Now I in this moment now, I can surrender to this moment too. I can surrender to this experience too. It doesn't have to be a danger element involved. So it's then you have to like just reps over time will just that new neural pathway, that new bandwidth will be reestablished.
Yeah, for sure. And so for you as somebody who has navigated substance abuse issues, who has found themselves in a life of sobriety at this point, how do you sit with the concept of plant medicine ceremonies and plant medicine work as it relates to your sobriety? Because I think that is a thing I've heard people talk about is, I'm sober, I can't do that. And we label those substances as automatically illegal and harmful because that's what we've been told our whole lives. But how do they fit within your sobriety?
So the first thing is the intention. You know, if like the intention is not to eat, you know, a whole eighth of mushrooms and get really weird at a concert. You know, the intention is to pick an amount with the facilitator that's going to serve the best purpose for that moment and go in with the intention of show me what I don't know, or I'm here to explore, or whatever it is. The intention's first thing. Now, I did for a long time, like I was the plant medicines, ayahuasca. I haven't done that yet, but I'm going to next year. Like that, it started to get on my radar probably like 3 years ago. And I had those conversations at first of like, nope, can't do it. Like that's a relapse. And in reality, it is the furthest thing from it. All that it is just, for me, my experience is that it's the next level of my healing. It's the next level. Like I feel 100%, I can say this without a shadow of a doubt. I am recovered from an alcoholic and an addict person. Like that's not me anymore. I'm recovered from that. Now it's about me. Like, how do I now step into like, what's my highest purpose now? Like, where do I find the next levels of me? Where do I find the highest version of Sam? Like, how do I break through the traumas or the things that I don't know about that are holding me back from being the conscious leader of men that I need to be to hold space for these men? What can I do to better myself there? And for me, the answer to that is plant medicine. And it's plant medicine, then it's doing the work after the plant medicine. It's not, you know, every weekend sitting in a mushroom ceremony. It's doing it once and then, you know, doing the work that it takes to get to a point where like all the stuff I learned in that ceremony is now part of my daily life.
Yeah, I think that's been a similar way that I've heard other people describe it, that substance abuse, when it's alcohol and weed and cocaine, any of the substances that we use, they're oftentimes ways of escaping ourselves, escaping our suffering, escaping our pains. They're a way of leaving or numbing out. Whereas my experience of actual plant medicine ceremonies is they take you deeper into you. Instead of leaving you, you go in. And sometimes you have to confront the hard stuff that's there. It's not always fun or sunshine and rainbows.
Yeah, I did a Wachuma San Pedro ceremony in Sedona, maybe like 2 months ago, and it was not a fun experience. Like, I got shown some darkness, but coming out of it, like afterward, like it broke me wide open, and it showed me all the things. Like, when I said I need to know what I don't know, it showed me all the things I don't know to move forward. And, you know, the integration was rough, and the experience was rough, but I feel like it was one of those, like, you know, like an arrow pulled back. You pull back the arrow to sling it, to shoot it forward. That's what it felt like. To be pulled back into, like, I was basically pulled back into an addict. I was pulled back into being an addict. And basically what it was showing me was, like, I hadn't, like, forgiven myself for that yet. I hadn't doing parts work or shadow work. I hadn't loved that part of myself yet. I had so much shame and guilt and anger and rage and resentment about myself for that period of my life that it was just like hiding out in the background. And then I went to this Pachuma ceremony, and I basically got brought back to that and said, why do you still feel this way about yourself, Sam? Like, you have 8 years of evidence that you are not that person anymore. And so coming out of it, that was the insight, was that, like, okay, that was part of me. I can't stuff it down. I can't pretend it doesn't exist. It was there. I love it. I even gave it a name. And so Fred. And so, I said, you know, Fred, I love you. Like, thanks for being part of me, but you can stay over there. Like, I acknowledge you. And it was just so healing to be able to, like, look at that and be like, it's part of me, but it's not me.
That's such an important part, I think, of the healing journey is to not only set the boundary that says, yeah, you go be over there, but there has to be that love part first, that forgiveness part, that willingness to embrace that part of you that feels scary to embrace. And not to let it control you, actually to embrace it, to say, I am not you. You are a piece of me, but you are not the whole of me. And now let me merge that fragmented part of myself with the wholeness of me.
Totally. Because as long as you don't address it, and like, I knew it was there. I didn't have at first, I didn't really have a connection to it. And it had almost, like, looking back, it's crazy to say this, but it had complete ownership over me. It had complete ownership over my thoughts, my behaviors, the way I interacted with certain people. Like, that one little dark part of me had complete ownership. And so it was because I just never looked at it. Like, it got to the point where, like, it was a callous almost. I just never wanted to look at it. When I did, freedom, just complete emotional freedom from it.
Well, you mentioned before a little bit ago that your next steps, you've sort of worked on the alcoholic, you've worked on the addict, you've worked on the self-love piece. And now that the next steps are for you is, like, what are the next levels of you? What does stepping into purpose more look like for you? Let's talk about what you're creating in the world. Tell me more about what you're on a mission for.
So my big mission, my big purpose is, I call it my 1 billion human dent. I want to impact 1 billion humans, and my plan is to do that through men's work. So working with men. So if I work with, say, a husband, that means that I have the potential to impact 5, maybe 6 people, his family. If it's a father, I have the potential to impact the people, you know, his daughters and his sons and his wife. So by working with these men to make them more whole, more complete, to remove the same blocks that I dealt with, those traumas that we didn't want to look at, how their masculinity was wounded or robbed from them when they were young, and how it's showing up now. If I can remove that and free them up to be a better husband, a better brother, better father, better whatever, better boss, CEO, whatever it is that they are here to do, if they can be freed up to be better at it, their reach increases as well, because they show up with love. They show up, you know, without that anger and without that resentment, you know, without that fear of that, you know, they show up with self-love. They don't have the fear that if I say I'm sad today, it doesn't mean that, like, I'm not a man anymore. It just means that I'm sad today. That's it. Nothing more. And so the ability to be able to say that shows up so huge. So my big plan for 2021 is I'm starting a mastermind for men it's called the Warrior Integration Blueprint. So it's basically going to work with what's keeping you from. So the big motto is be a warrior, but don't be at war. So if you can, like, to be at war is almost, it's kind of a badge of honor almost. Like, people wear I'm at war, like I struggle, like I fight, I'm, being a man about it. Like, that's being at war. You can be a warrior is a very still being. A warrior surrenders. A warrior surrenders to the fight and to what is. It's not about giving up. It's not about quitting. It's not about saying I am less than. It's about stepping into that warrior archetype and holding space for your world, holding space for the people around you to be safe. So that's my big thing here going forward as far as my coaching goes. I also have a TED Talk I'm doing in May. It's based around why we need to stop settling for hope. So hope and worry are basically, they're just like faith and fear. They're both rooted in, faith and fear are rooted in something that hasn't happened yet. Hope and worry are both rooted in stagnant energy. Because if you're worrying about something, worrying will fool you into thinking you're doing something about it. When in reality, if you sit on the couch and worry, you're not doing anything about it. If worry triggers you into action, worry was useful. If hope triggers you into action, hope was useful. But like, you can sit on the couch and worry about something, or you can sit on the couch and hope something happens. You're doing the same thing. So if that hope triggers you into belief, self-belief, and belief that you can do it and achieve it, that's where all the magic happens. So really, the question is, do you love yourself enough to believe in yourself and step out of hope and into action?
I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you hold men's spaces like this, the Warrior Integration Blueprint Mastermind that you're creating.
Mm-hmm.
I find it so fascinating to find how other men are holding men's circles and men's spaces, because it can be done really artfully and it can be done really inartfully. It can either re-entrench the same alpha, beta, hierarchical power over kind of dynamics. I think in our current culture, there's this interesting way that men are owning the victim mentality, where it's like, as we start having conversations about more inclusion, about other people having resources in this world, there's this like victimization that's happening to white men. That's going on. And what I find is that men of color, men who don't so neatly fall on the gender spectrum, men that don't fall into heterosexual relationships, men of other types don't necessarily always feel safe or they belong within men's groups. So how do you hold men's groups that are inclusive, that are safe, that are valuing all men, not just one slice of masculinity?
So I like to say lead from the middle. So basically, get in the trenches with these guys and just, it can be as simple as just like looking someone in the eye and just being like, I see you. I hear you. You are safe. Just providing that safe environment. I ask a lot of guys, I say, where in your life do you feel resistance? Where do you feel insecurities? Where do you feel incomplete? Where do you feel fear? And where do you feel anger? And then we kind of like, that's kind of the drop in. And so it's really a present moment thing. Like, at this moment, when was the last time you got scared? When was the last time you got angry? And then, and I'll either go first or we'll just start around the circle, but to just create the environment where it's confidential and secure and safe. And, where the energy is such that the men that don't feel safe, they won't go first or speak first, but they'll see that other men, like, again, it's like you said, like, you see one man start to cry, it's like a waterfall. I mean, pun intended, like waterfall around the circle of like, cause the men will like immediately either feel compassion or like they'll feel something inside of them that, oh my gosh, that's me too. Like if you can just like, it's so crazy how as one man, if you talk about something, you can hear 10 other men immediately be like, oh my gosh, me too. I never knew. Like, I thought I was alone. To make them not feel alone and to be a part of something is just massive. And then just show up consistently. Show up consistently with like the eye contact, and show up consistently with the love and the to be seen, to be heard. It just goes so far in breaking down that wall and just making them, because you get someone that has never been in that situation before and they have that first release where they feel safe to do so. I mean, it's amazing. Like you can see their shoulders drop almost like 3 inches because they just for the first time feel like they can, like, they don't have to watch their back, or they don't feel wrong. They don't feel broken like we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, I hear that. What would you say are maybe some of the major or the top values that you try to infuse in your groups? Like, what's the most important values you bring to the work you do?
I would say that I love the word radical. So I say radical honesty and radical candor. So radical candor is a lot about it's a two-way street where it's, stepping into my men's circle, be willing to leave the expectation at the door, and be willing to hear what you need to hear tonight, or you need to hear today. Whatever it is, it could be something that you already know, and it could be something that you don't know and you're not ready to accept yet. But don't just shovel it away. So be open. Like the motto for my company is be open to change. Be open to hearing something new. Be open to be willing. Willingness is a superpower. Be willing to listen to what is being told. And you know what? You may hear something for you that somebody didn't say to you. Like there could be another guy talking, and they could say something to another guy, but you know what? You were there and you heard it. Like, it doesn't mean it wasn't for you. Just keep your ears open and keep the observancy. So Peter Crone, a big fan of his work, he says that vigilance is fear-based and observance is love-based. When you're vigilant, you're fearful and you're bottled up and you're tensed up and you're looking around. When you're observant, you're open and you're accepting. And so being observant and being willing to hear whatever it is you need to hear is the number one value I would say that I bring to the group.
I love that. And I actually really love this concept. At first, I had an interesting reaction to when you were sharing the topic of your future TED Talk around hope not being enough. And yet I actually, as I sit with it, I actually think that it's true that hope has a place and is important and is the initial spark for something new. But if you don't move forward, if you don't take action, if you don't step forward and start to make it real, just becomes you stuck. There's no forward energy. Then you get stuck in this coping with the fact that reality is so disparate from your hope. And I think a lot of challenging stuff can come up when you sit constantly looking at how reality doesn't match your hope.
Yeah, that can be paralyzing for sure. And cause then if you're stuck in hope, you're also not doing anything about it. Like it's almost like you're stuck in that spiral over here of paralyzing, hoping, seeing things you want, but then where do I start? You have to just take that first step and just start bridging that gap to make your reality what you want. And if hope is the thing that triggers you into action, hope did its job. No question about it. But if you stay there in that hope, even like law of attraction, like there's action involved in law of attraction. It's not just sitting there and thinking, I want this.
So if you were going to take everything that you've learned in your journey and everything that you're hoping to share with men moving forward in the direction of making your 1 billion person dent, what is one piece of advice you would like to leave men with that are listening to this podcast?
So, I mean, obviously we talked about being a beginner, which is huge, but I think that really, the one thing that men need to hear is that you are okay. You are, as you are, who you are, what you're scared of, what you're insecure about, where you feel incomplete, you are okay. And if you don't feel okay today, that's okay too. But the bottom line is know that you are okay. You're not broken.
And then what would be the next step beyond that? Once somebody accepts that in themselves, that they're okay, what's the next step?
The next step is looking at what it is that made you feel not okay. What story, what program, what pattern, what person, what event where along your path did that little hook get in you that it's not okay to feel not okay, where it's not okay to not know? At what point did you learn that? And then when you get to that, when you find out what that is, just do whatever you can do to handle it. Talk about it, write about it, take mushrooms about it. I mean, whatever works for you. Go run. Do whatever you need to do to fix that misunderstanding in your life and clear away that hook.
Yeah, I think that's so true. We are meaning-making machines. We constantly are making meaning on a reality. And until we find out where we started making meaning in a certain way about life that has caused all of us to feel not okay, to feel broken, to feel unworthy, to feel whatever we feel that's limiting us, till we really find out what is causing us to make meaning about reality in that way, we can't undo it. We can't create a new meaning on life. Mm-hmm. That's why just a mantra, even if you don't believe it, mantras don't really work. Like you're just saying something you don't believe and then making yourself more mad at yourself. It's not until you actually believe it and you start to shift the way you see the world and the way that you make meaning on the world. I think that's very true. So if people are interested in finding out more about your current coaching offers, what you're creating in the future, your TED Talk, how might they find out more about you?
So I'm really, the place I'm most active is on Instagram, and it's at Sam Gibbs Morris. That's Gibbs with 2 B's. Also, I have a Facebook page, which is also Sam Gibbs Morris. On LinkedIn, I'm also pretty active on LinkedIn. That's just my name, Sam Morris. And then my website is samgibbsmorris.com. And then, so if you want to send me a DM about getting into the Warrior Integration Blueprint Mastermind, just Instagram is probably the best way to do that.
And when do you hope to launch that?
Launching that in January.
Oh, so soon.
Yeah.
How are you feeling? Are you feeling ready for it?
I'm so ready for it, man. I can't wait. Like I'm so ready. Just like I've done like the curriculum and all the stuff around it. I'm just ready to just take this out into the world.
Oh, I'm so excited to see it in its manifested form.
Yeah, thank you, man. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, I so appreciate you being here. I appreciate you reaching out to want to connect over this topic that we're both clearly so passionate about. It's been a real joy to talk to you and to learn from your experiences of manhood, of addiction, of self-love. I think that's just been really powerful, and I'm sure the listeners will really enjoy listening.
Travis, thank you so much for having me on. This was an absolutely great conversation. Really honored to have been here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
If people want to get connected with me, you can go to my website at travisstock.com. You can find me on Instagram at travers03, or you can email me directly at travisstock03@gmail.com. I'm also on Patreon. If you're liking the content that I'm putting out there, if you want to support the mission of The New Masculine, please go to patreon.com/thenewmasculine. Again, that's patreon.com/thenewmasculine. It's been a real joy to connect with you. It's so nice to be in spaces where men are doing the work and encouraging other men to do the work. So thanks for waving the flag with me and for putting a stake in the ground and saying we got to do it differently as men.
Thank you.